Okay, let's get into the next shiur. We are starting the last shiur in Tzurba M'Rabanan, volume number 22, which again we'll split up into two. First, we'll discuss Eruv Chatzeros, and then we'll discuss Eruv Tchumen and Tchum in general. Again, the volume 22 is the Dr. Harold and Magda Katz volume. Tzurba M'Rabanan, Hilchos Shabbos is the end of Hilchos Shabbos. We're getting into the last topics that we'll be discussing. The next volumes go on to other halachas of Rosh Chodesh as the Orach Chaim continues. So again, we spoke in the last shiurim about the concept of an Eruv and modern Eruvs that are made, and we have the Tzuras HaPesachs and the strings around, and what's a Rosh Hashanah, what's a Rosh Hashanah. So in addition to that, there is a Takana D'Rabbanan. We're going to start on page 333. There's a Takana D'Rabbanan that every household living in an area enclosed by partitions, if you have a semi-public area, if you have a yard that's jointly used by a number of families, if there is an alleyway, whatever it is, even if it's surrounded by strings and you have what we call an Eruv, you still have to have what's called an Eruv Chatzeros. You have to join together to become one big happy family by designating some bread, putting it on the side, and in that way, making sure that we don't get mixed up with a semi-public rishus and a full public rishus. This takana is very old, goes back all the way to the times of Shlomo HaMelech. We're on Eruvin Daf Chaf Aleph, source number 1, on page 333. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, B'shar Shetikin Shlomo Eruvin V'Nitilos Yadayim. Right, the takanas D'Rabbanan were made at different times in history. Moshe Rabbeinu made some takanas D'Rabbanan. Right, Kriyas HaTorah comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. Some takanas were made by Shlomo HaMelech. Most laws were made later on. Some were made by Mordechai and Esther. And Chazal added on, of course, a number of laws as well. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, says the Gemara, Shlomo Eruvin V'Nitilos Yadayim. Shlomo HaMelech was Mesakin Eruv and Nitilos Yadayim. Yotzatz Abaskol V'Yamra, Abaskol went out when he made these takanas, and he said, B'niyim Chacham Libcha Yislach Li Bikamani, or the pasuk from Mishlei that Shlomo HaMelech himself wrote. But you see there that Shlomo HaMelech made Eruv, and Eruv that means there Eruv Chatzeros. What does that mean? That means that carrying in a area that is semi-public is midaraisa mutter, but the Rabbanan said that you have to create what's called an Eruv Chatzeros. Remember the Davav. Source number 2. Tana Rabbanan, Arba Rishuyos L'Shabbos, Rishus L'Yachad, Rishus L'Rabim, Karmelis U'Makom P'tur. The 4 types of Rishuyos. Chatzeros L'Rabim, Mevuos She'enim Mefulashim. If you have yards of the public, or Mevaos, alleyways that are not Mefulash, that means, let's say there are 3 sides, so then Ervu Mutarin. Only if you make an Eruv Chatzeros. We're talking about a Chatzer. Chatzer is surrounded by all sides, but it's Shel Rabim. If you made an Eruv Chatzeros, if they placed an Eruv, that joins the Chatzeros Mutarin, then it is mutter to carry in that area. Lo Ervu Asurin. But without making an Eruv, it would be Asur. And the Rambam discusses the conditions for requiring an Eruv Chatzeros in the beginning of Hilchos Eruvin. Hilchos Eruvin discusses Eruv Chatzeros and Eruv Tchumen. So the Rambam, Chazer Sheish Bashchenim Harbe, a Chazer that has many neighbors. Kolecham Me'em Bebayis La'atzmo, and everybody lives in their own house. If you have one house with a lot of rooms, that does not need Eruv Chatzeros if it's all one big happy family. But if you have a yard that a couple of families empty into, then Din Torah Hushi Kula Mutar and Lataltel. B'Kol Chatzer Mida Araisa. It's all mutter. Everybody can be metaltel in the whole yard. Umi batam lachatzer. Umi chatzer levatim. From here to there and there to here. Because it's all Rishus HaYachid. It fulfills the requirements. It's surrounded by a walls. It could be indoors. It could be the hallways of an apartment building, right? It's surrounded. It's roofed. It's Rishus HaYachid l'gamri midaraisa. But you still need an Eruv. Still the Eruv Tchumen. V'chein adin b'Medina shimukavas choma. You have a city that's surrounded by a wall. Gavo asar tvakim 10 tvakim sheyesh lo delasos v'nenos balayla, and it's closed at night. It's closed at night. So you don't need what we call an Eruv. It's surrounded by walls. So midaraisa, it is a Rishus HaYachid. Aval halacha beis midivrei sofrim. Asur l'shchenim l'talta b'Rishus HaYachid sheishbach chaluka b'diurin. It's asur midrabanan for the neighbors to carry in the areas that separated ashi ya'arvu kol hashchenim kulam me'erev Shabbos, till everybody from erev Shabbos were ma'arev. Erev means to mix. That's the literal translation. Echad chatzer v'echad mavi v'echad medina, whether it's a country or a yard or a mavui. V'davar zet takana Shlomo ubeis dinahu. Shlomo HaMelech already did this. Why did Shlomo make such a takana? Shlomo, in his infinite wisdom, so people wouldn't make a mistake, and say, just like it's supposed to go from my house to this yard, which is semi-public, also going from the yard to the street, which is in this daraisa. So it's a gzera. It's a gzera. The reason is a gzera. They made a takana which functions like a gzera. Gzera is don't do this shema yavo. This is do this shelo yavo. Shelo yavo. So that's the din. People will think, since it's a public rishus, what's the difference between the yard and the street? That's why halacha hey lafichach tiket shekol rishus hayachin shetechalek b'diurin. All rishus hayachin, any rishus hayachin that is separated by people. The yeachis kol echad ve'echad bar rishus la'atzmo, and everybody has their own area, their own private area. The yishar mimena makom rishus kulan, and there's an area that's joint. The yad kulan shaveh bo kagon chatzer labatim, like yards to houses. Shenachshov oso hamakom shiad kulam shaveh bo ki'ilu hu rishus harabim, says the Rambam, as if it's a rishus larabim. V'nachshov kol makom u'makom she'achaz kol echem nashchinim v'chel kol atzvul shulu ba'ava rishus yachid. Their private areas are rishus yachid. The joint areas are ki'ilu. It's rishus harabim. The asur lahotzi me rishus hachalak la'atzmal rishus yad kulam shaveh bo, and we asered Rabbanan Shlomo Melech asered going from private to semi-public or the opposite. Everybody can be in their own house, and that's it. Not join the other rishuyos. And what is this eruv? What do you do for an eruv? That you connect with one machal shemenichin oso me'erev Shabbos klomar shekulanu mu'uravin v'ochel echalu kulanu. You designate one bread, so it's ki'ilu. We're all mu'urav, and one bread for all. And one person is not mechulak. We're all one big happy family. And that's what happens. That's what by setting this aside, by setting this bread, this matzah aside, so that connects us to all. The Rambam explains that for Erev Chatzeros has to be bread. Bread or matzah has to be a loaf. Maybe that's what's nikar, that's the staple. Besides the Erev Chatzeros, besides the Chatzeros, we know there's something called a shituf mavos, meaning houses to yards, then yards to alleyways. The alleyways in the days of old, the days of the Talmud, that's how neighborhoods were built. Houses into yards, yards into alleyways, alleyways into streets. So the larger is called a shituf mavos, right? The same idea, to connect all the chatzers to each other. One big happy family. In the chatzer, you have to use bread. Shituf mavos could be any food. Any food. But if you use any food, you still have to do the Erev Chatzeros, because we don't want to forget about Erev Chatzeros. But the Rambam tells us if you use bread for the Shituf Mavos, then you don't have to do anything else. So if you use bread for the larger area, that's all. And that's what we do, Lamaisa, in our big cities, right? We put one box of matzah, and that's it for all of the alleyways and all of the yards, says the Rambam in Ilchas Eruvin again in the first parak. So we spoke about the need. Now we get into what do you do? Ha'erev shosem b'nei hachatzer, source number 4. Ha'erev shosem b'nei hachatzer ze'em zeh, hu anikra erev chatzeros. This eruv, this mixture, is called an eruv chatzeros, a mixing of the yards. She'osed anshe mavui zeh im kol medina hu nikra shituf. Ein ma'arv b'chatzeros el b'pas shlema balvad, a whole bread. The shituf, b'im b'pas b'im b'shar ochlim. Shituf could be bread or any other food. Hamish ta'afin b'mavui, tzrichim la'ariv b'chatzeros. Even if you do a shituf mavos, as we said, you still have to do the Erev Chatzeros Kedesh Lo L'Shakeh Chatinokos Torah's Erev, so that children don't forget Torah's Erev, even though nowadays nobody knows about Erev. If you ask anybody on the street, where's the matzah? They're like, what are you talking about? Nobody knows this, but this is the halacha. The halacha is that if you have matzah there, so then that's good enough. The children don't know what's going on in the mavui, so that's why, what does that do with Chatzeros? You have to still do the Erev Chatzeros. But if you have bread there, everybody knows the loaf. Again, nobody really knows, but that's the din. And this is what's summarized in Lamais and the Aruch HaShabbos. This is what we do. Erev Chatzeros is done today. We do Shituf Mavos, which covers the Erev Chatzeros, and we use a box of matzah, so it covers that it's a pas shlema. What does one do? How do you do it? So the Aruch HaShabbos explains exactly what you do on the third line in source number 5. Ofan hashitafu shenodam pas or shar ma'acholim. I take bread, hopefully if it's going to cover, or other foods, or other foods that are eaten with bread, and I say this is for, I'm being zocha this on behalf of all the people of the mavui. And I leave it in one of the places, one of the public areas like the shul. Everything becomes mutter then. What do you do? How do you do it? Zechia requires two people. So one person gives it to another person who acquires it on behalf of all of the people of the Mavli. Yavarech, right before he picks it up to be zoche on behalf of all the Mavli, he makes a bracha. He makes the bracha of Al Mitzvahs Erev, the same bracha that you make on Erev Tavshilin and Erev Tchumen, maybe we'll get to, and Erev Chazeros. And after the zikui, you make the bracha, you lift up the bread, and then afterwards you say, Bahadin Eruva, Yehi Shari Lana, with this Erev. It sounds like we're used to this from Erev Tavshilin, but with this Erev, Yehi Shari Lana should be mutter to us, La Fukeli Yule bin Abatim Lachatzer, Menachaz Labatim, to go in and out. Carry things in from Chatzar to Batim and out. From roof to roof, from Chatzar to Chatzar. And if you do Shituf, Be'ir Zeh, V'chol Misha, and for all the Dayarim here and any Dayar that will come. If anybody's going to be here for Shabbos, right, we're bezoched that for them also. Kasher osam shitim avos, ba'ir sheish batikin mechitzos, kedin minhag hamakuba, like we do this today, says the Aruch HaShabbos, in a place where you're doing the shituf, in a place where there is mechitzos, we do it through zikui pas l'chov and a year, and also bebeis hakneses. You put it in the shul, so it's able to be gotten by all the people. Harizem mol shabbosos harbe kozman shabbos kayemes. You could use it, do it once a year. It's for all the shabbosos of the year. For Gilom Asoshit of Zayde mitzvahs matzos ksheros LaPesach, and the minhag is to use matzah, so it doesn't get spoiled and it doesn't last that long. And also, you can leave it there on Pesach. Fine. How much has to be set aside? How much bread? How big of a little roll? A whole challah? We put a box of matzahs. That's the minhag, so obviously that's enough. And how much? So the Mishnah Eruvin it depends if it's only for a few people or it's for many people. 18 is the cutoff, right? The Mishnah says up until 18 people, so then you has to have the volume of a grogeris, of a dried fig per person. For 18 or more people, it has to be enough for 2 meals for one person. That's all it has to be. 2 meals for one person, which is called 18 dried figs. 18 grogeris. That's the Mishnah in Eruvin, Daf Pei. For Kamu Shiur and source number 6, Bevanshe Merubin, when there's a lot of people, more than 18, Mazon Shtei Sudas Lakulam. That is 18 or more. 18 or more. So it's 2 meals for one person. 2 meals for one person for everybody. But if they're less, then could grow the Kol Echad Ve'echad. And the Gemara says how much is Merubin? Elach. That's how much it is. And then what does that mean? So the Gemara continues in source number 6. If you split it up, you're not going to get a grogos for each person. That's Merubin. And that's what we said. It's the 18. 2 sudos is 18 grogeris. What does that mean, Lamaisa? In our shiurim, that's a discussion in the Tanaim and in the Rishonim, the Shulchan Aruch quotes 2 days about 6 or 8 eggs. That's the Shulchan Aruch, source number 7, Shin Samaches. V'imem yoser mishmona esrei, afilu in elef yoser, even 1,000 people, the shiur mazon, shtei sudos. 2 meals, shehein, shmona esrei, grogeris, shehein, kishisha beitzim, v'yishomrin kishmona beitzim. 6 or 8, l'chadchilu, we use the larger shiur, says the Mishnah Berurah. The yeshomrin kishmona, l'chadchila nachalono go b'di'evet dai kishisha. L'chadchila 8, size of eggs, and 6. That's what we do. That's why we have a matzah. Whenever we have an Eruv, we also have a matzah put aside, a box of matzah put aside in one of the shuls, usually in the neighborhood. Good. Next point, source number 9 we're going to pick up, and that is, this works if you have 20 Jewish families that all hold of Hilchos Shabbos and Eruv, and we're good to go. The problem is, what if you have non-Jews living in the city? They have nothing to do with Eruv, so you're becoming one big happy family, but the guy can't be one big happy family with you. What if you have non-observant Jews? They're not taking part in the Eruv. So what do you do? So says the Mishnah in Eruvin in the 6th parak. So one has to literally rent, symbolically, but literally rent the reshus from those not taking part in the Eruv. Hadar manachri b'chatzer, the Mishnah in Eruvin says in source number 9, somebody lives with a non-Jew, o misheina modeh be'eruv, harizeh oser alav. Right, if you're living with a non-Jew, or with somebody who doesn't modeh be'eruv, a non-observant Jew, so that asers, that ruins the whole Eruv. Because you have somebody there that is taking part that ruins it. Rabbi Yaakov says it's only a problem if there's more than one Jew. holding of the Eruv. If there's only one, we'll see why. It's okay. La'olamena oser. If you have two, so the more Jews there are, the worse it is. If there's one Jew, it's better. So the Gemara explains. What's this machlokas about? Fundamentally, a goy's rishus should not ruin it. Right? Says the Gemara. Samach Beis in Eruvin. Really, the inhabitants of a nachri, of a non-Jew, should not ruin. Lo shmei dira. But the question is here, the Rabbanan wanted to separate and not have the Jews and the non-Jews living in the same chutzner. So they figured if they say that a non-Jew's presence ruins the Eruv, that will make people not live together. And therefore, they will separate as part of it, like Bishalakim and Pasakim and the others. So too, this is also in that category of type of halacha. Right, we don't want you to live there and be influenced by him. So Rabbi ben Yaakov says, if there's only one Jew, it's mutter. Why? Because that's a milsut lo shchicha. One Jew is going to live with a bunch of non-Jews. So in that case, there's no need to do schiras rishus. No need to do schiras rishus. And we'll see if there's only one Jewish family and everybody else is goyim, it's mutter. You don't need anything. You don't need anything because it's milsut lo shchicha. Rabbi ben Yaakov Savar, kiva the nachri chasher shchichas damim, trade the shchichi the dari gazer b'Rabanan. Two that are shchiach to live. Two Jews might live together amongst non-Jews. There's a xera. Rameir suffers in the mikri v'dayer. Rameir says it's not so uncommon. Not so uncommon. So that's the machlokes. We pass it like it was in Yaakov. So this is a kula. This is a kula. But if there is, most of the time in cities, there's more than one Jew living there. So the only option would be to symbolically rent the use of the area to the Jew who's establishing the Eruv. Again, it doesn't accomplish anything except this accomplishment. Doesn't have to be halachically or legally binding for any other purpose except for Eruv. That's what the Gemara says here in source number 11. M'Rabanan, ein Eruv mo b'makam nachri. The Eruv is not going to help. Ein bittul rishus. They can't just nullify themselves and sequester themselves. That's not good enough. You need schirus. Ein bittul rishus mo b'makam nachri ad sheyaskir. Right, it's only if a yaskir, and we assume that something like the non-Jews not going to want to even do this symbolic rental, so that Jew's going to move out. That's going to get their goal anyway. So the same thing applies to a non-Jew and to a Yisrael Meshumad, a Jew who does not hold of Eruvin, the same thing, right? They go on Eruvin Samach Tes, source number 12. Yisrael Meshumad, Mishamer Shabbato B'Shul, if he at least keeps Shabbos in public, then about the Rishus, he has some idea of Eruv and Shabbos, and therefore he can be mavatal rishus, so to speak, say, I'm removing myself. So that's good enough. But if he doesn't, he's a machal Shabbos before Hesya, he can't, and therefore he's treated like a non-Jew for this regard, and we have to be. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. This is Halacha L'maisa. Shulchan Aruch says, if one Jew lives with goyim in the Chatzar, there's no problem. A number of years ago, I had a shiloh right before, like an hour before Shabbos. Somebody called. They're in a hotel. They rented an apartment, an Airbnb, in a European city, and there's a public area there. And they want to know if they could go out to the yard. So after a few minutes of trying to research, but then they realize that they're the only Jewish family in the whole complex. So that's it. You don't need an Erev Chazeros. It's surrounded by a wall, so it's good that you can carry it. You don't need Erev Chazeros. They're the only Jewish family. Says the Shulchan Aruch. Hadar magoy b'chatzar eino osur alav. Actually, you shnei Yisraelim darim b'shnei batim. You need at least two Jews living in two different houses. If both families are living in the same house, they're like one family. Va'osrim zelzeh. Oz hagoy osur alav, and the guy would aser. Ve'namol shivato goy reshuso. The guy cannot be mavatal reshus. El tzorch sheyaskir mimenu. You need the rental. And the same thing says the Shulchan Aruch with the Yisrael Meshumad. Yisrael Meshumad avodas elilim or lachal Shabbos befer Hesya, right? Avodas Zara or Chilul Shabbos. That's the halacha of Kugar lachal Torah kula. Afilein mechalo is a drabanan harehu guy. But if you think about it, how do I go to every non-Jew in my town and give every one of them $1? That's not practical. It's not possible. So what do? So what is done is based on the Shulchan Aruch, based on the Rishonim. If there is a governmental official, if there is a person who has ultimate power in certain situations, let's say in a time of emergency, could the government take over my house? Generally, yes. So if that's true, so all I have to do is rent from them. Rent from the governmental official, rent from the police, somebody who has that type of authority, and then that would be all I have to do. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Shin Tzadi Aleph. You have to really rent from every non-Jew. Ve'ein maspik b'mashi yiskar misar ha'ir. B'medra, you can't just rent from the mayor when she'ena batim shalo, if the mayor doesn't own the houses. V'gamein l'rishus l'shtamesh b'bati b'nei ha'ir klala filu b'shas milchama, if they're totally off limits. Avo b'makom shekol tzarchi ha'ir einam nasim el api asar. But if the tzarchi ha'ir are done by the government, amamuna shalo, vada sheschiras me'asar ha'u o mischiro v'lekito mahani. And therefore, that is the minhag. The Aruch HaShabbos quotes that is to rent from the local authorities, because you can't rent from every person, right? Even though some are makbid, there's an idea of eminent domain about the authorities going into a person's house and taking it over for communal need. Minhag olam is to be mekel. Says the Aruch HaShabbos, Yesh koshi lasos erev chatzeros be'ir o b'shkuna gedola. It's hard to make an erev chatzeros in a big town, in a big city. You can't rent from all the goyim. If the government has reshus, they could put items in my reshus for some reason if they need. After liskar as bate anachrim shulton atzmo. And he says, you rent it from you go to the police and you give them $1 and say, here, this is for symbolically renting the public areas. It's not going to affect anything except Jewish law. That's all you have to say. And you give them $1. That's it. He says, some say that they can't go into private properties, but again, the minhag olam is to be mekel. The Menucha Zaba or Moshe Levi also says, L'kula, because when push comes to shove at a time of war, the governments can take over any private house. So Cheres as Reshus B'nei Ha'ir. V'Moshav Misar Bitachon, the Minister of Defense, Mafaked Hagana Ezrachit, the head of civil security. V'yesh lo mamash yismochu, and they have what to rely on. She'af al pi she'im bizmanenu koach afilu rosh memshala. Even the prime minister can't throw somebody out of their house without a permit. If they can use the house b'shas milchama, that is good enough. And this is what most poskim hold that we're allowed to do. There is a question. Rabbi Jachter here in source number 18 quotes that some poskim like Rav Shechter hold that this only allows them to go to the public places, not to go into the private non-Jews' houses. But that's a machlokes, right? Some say yes, some say it's all one big happy reshus. But he quotes from Rav Shechter here that the right of eminent domain is rarely used and it's quite difficult to apply, and they would limit. You can't go into the private property of a non-Jew or a non-observant Jew. Where does this come up very lamaisa? Communal housing. What about a hospital? What about a hotel? An apartment building for sure we need, because that's different houses and different eatings and totally separate apartments. What about hotels and the like? So this is what's discussed by the Shmir Shabbos. There's some cases that everybody agrees to, and some cases that are under machlokas. So Shmir Shabbos says in 19, Binyan Bakum Mugudar, Kamo, Beis Malone, Beit Cholem, a hospital, a hotel, Beis Avos, a senior living center, Machanet Tzva'i, an army base. It is one person in charge, and there's somebody that lives there. If everybody eats in the same place, and the food comes from the same place, that's for sure, no need for an Erev. You don't need to designate a box of matzah. They have the same kitchen, and they all eat from that area. No need for an Erev Chatzeres there. Even if everybody has their own room to sleep in, if everybody eats in one place, no Erev Chatzeres needed. 2. If they eat their own food, but they eat in the same place, that's also okay. It doesn't have to be that all the food comes from the kitchen. Even if they have their own food, but they all eat in the Chadar Ochel, that is also good enough. But if they don't, everybody eats in their own place, then you need an Erev Chatzeres. In that case, if everybody eats in their own place, so that would mean a hotel. If it's a kosher hotel that everybody eats in the dining room, fine. But if it's not, if it's a hotel out with a bunch of non-Jews also, so maybe that would need. Only if they eat all together. So, pashtus, if in a hotel, one would need and Erev Chatzeros. The Aruch HaShabbos says he doesn't even think that the heter for a hotel eating in one dining room, that might not even be. Because after all, he says, when you go to a hotel, your ikar room is your private room. That's your ikar place. You go to a dining room for a little bit. Maybe on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Yeah, for Yom Tov, we spend many hours in the dining room. But he's saying in a case where you just go in and out for a little bite, then maybe even if you eat in the same place, it's not good enough. That's what he says in source 20. He's not sure. The ikar dira is your own private cheder. It's arai ve'enu shoasham klal kodem achila. You don't hang out there. Like I'm saying, for a yantif, might not mean you don't need Chatzeros, but for a Shabbos, you go there for a Shabbos to a hotel. If it's everybody's there, the dining room is an ikar. But he's saying in a case where it's not, and therefore he's not sure that it would be okay in this case. But it could be that if all the food is in the kitchen at time of Ben Hashmashus, so then already that's also something to be for non-Jews might aser in this case as well. So what do you do? So what do you do in this case if you would have to make an error? So let's see. First of all, mention there is a heter of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says maybe in a hotel you don't need an Erev Chatzeros, or in a hospital, or in any of these cases. Why? Because the hospital, the hotel owner, they have what's called tfisas yad in all the rooms. It's their beds, it's their fridges, it's their chairs. So that's called tfisas yad. And if one person has tfisas yad, if the hotel owner has tfisas yad and they can put whatever they want in the room, that's lamela, enough to not need an Erev Chatzeros. That's the, again, most other poskim assume not automatically. Again, if you're in a difficult situation, one could rely on Moshe. But this is what Moshe says regarding these types of situations. But in Kli Sachur, Moshe says it about buildings, even let's say a building that has the landlord supplies furniture in the building, and it belongs to the landlord. The landlord can take it and can put others in. So he says that also. Gam Torah M'Schurma, Nefshat Tfisas Yad Lamaskir, Davim Tzarach Rishus, Hayesh Lamaskir Rishus Shasocher Muchrach Lachzit Pefes Asacher. You have to keep my fridge, my couch in your house, and therefore Moshe would say there is no need in that case. How would you go about if you're in a hotel and you don't want to rely on a Rabbi Moshe B'diavad? He says you would go over to, you can't find the owner of the hotel. So he writes here in source number 23, you could go over to the receptionist and the concierge, the reception, and give him $1 and say, Jewish law requires that I pay for the usage of the hallway. So I'm just giving this to you. And they'll give you a strange look and they'll just take the $1 and then you're done. The owner is not present, but it is halachically acceptable, explains Rabbi Mordechai Frankel, to rent from any employee of the owner. Therefore, one can rent the rights from the concierge to the front desk of the hotel. According to this opinion, one of the Jewish people staying at the hotel should give the concierge $1 and tell him he wants to rent the hallways for the right to carry in them during the Jewish Shabbos. He can explain to the concierge this will not practically affect anyone else in the hotel and is merely necessary for Jewish law to allow him to carry in the hallways on Shabbos. So again, sometimes you'll get some eyes. Again, you might have that when you makes Erev in any type of city, has to go speak to the police commissioner, has to speak to someone who would have that responsibility. This is all the first part of Erev Chatzeros, which connects to what we discussed in the last year, and that was all about the Rishuyos, Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah, Carmelis, and Makam Tur, and modern Erev. So modern Erevs use what we discussed last time, physical Suras HaPasachs and surrounding areas. That's what we need to have, and Erev Chatzeros. And every Erev in the world has to use an Erev Chatzeros as well. It's really a sheet of mavos. And we said if you use bread or matzah for a sheet of mavos, then you're covered. You don't have to have separate Chatzeros for each one. Next time, as I mentioned, the last year we'll do, and that is regarding the other type of Erev, and that's Erev Tchumen, which Hashem will get up to in the last year.